Continuing our reading in Hellbent for Election by Phyllis Speshock, Chapter 23. The sun rose bright and warm, cutting through the mist and evaporating it. Shafts of light streamed in through the crude little open windows of the treehouse and fell upon a strange scene. Alexis, sitting cross-legged and occupying nearly the whole of the flimsy enclosure, was smiling gently down upon his own countenance. For there in his lap lay two stray cats, curled into furry balls and sleeping peacefully. And all about them, up and down his arms, thighs, and shoulders, were perched birds of half a dozen different kinds and types and colors. Indeed, one very fiery cardinal sat peacefully atop Alexis's glimmering head, and all of them, whether sparrow, blue jay, starling, robin, wild canary, or cardinal, including the yellow tiger cat and the gray angora, seemed to have absorbed his radiance until they fairly glowed. The yellow tiger cat stretched out its paws across the gray angora's neck, and a blue jay rested on Alexis' knee, reached down, and rubbed his beak from side to side against the luminous outstretched paw. "Alexis," I whispered, and at once they began stirring and chattering with uneasiness, very softly but aware there was an unseen presence. The gray angora opened its eyes and looked drowsily about. Alexis nodded slowly and tenderly stroked the battle-scarred ears. "Why do they glow so?" I asked, still whispering. He smiled. "Because they are closer to him through me." "You mean that's his glory?" "If you like. Or his love." "They go against their own nature?" "Of course. That is the whole idea." I sat staring at them, and a wild canary spread out its wings, ruffled its feathers, and then hopped down from Alexis's wrist to the angora's upturned side and settled itself. The cat eyed it disinterestedly and turned away. The tiger, on the other hand, gave it a loving swipe with its tongue and then resumed dozing. "Alexis," I whispered again, "does it happen like this with people up there?" People are more difficult," he said, "more determined to resist and cling to their own sinful way. Besides, I am not allowed to paint you any rosy word pictures, Hellbent. You have to accept what you have read in the guidebook and love him enough to trust him for the rest. You see, you are entitled to and must make the decision to trust. I have told you this before." "But if he never revokes free will?" "He has not revoked the free will of these birds and animals, Hellbent. The tiger may reach out and devour the canary. The angora may, with one cuff, fell the blue jay." "But they don't want to. Is that what you are telling me?" "I'm telling you nothing, Hellbent. Nothing of what happens when you pass beyond the office of the High Registrar. I am not permitted to. You have been given equal guarantees with all other humans, and you must trust or reject according to your own will. I am at liberty only to help you on this side of his office, to clarify, explain, urge, and assist." "Well," I admitted, "you are very lovable, Alexis. If all the creatures up there were like you—" "But we have mentioned before that your kind shall judge my kind." That doesn't mean they'll be any more lovable, just that they'll have more practice by the time they get there." Alexis grinned and shook his head, causing the cardinal to flutter its wings. "Tell me, Hellbent, what of Della during your years of attending the various churches? Did she keep her promise to dissuade you?" "Yes, Alexis, and I broke mine, I'm afraid. I did preach to her, at least, when she tried to subvert the hostile force." "What methods did she use?" Arguments, mostly. Non-regenerate would not stand silent for any other means." "What kind of arguments?" "Every kind. Sometimes she tried to appeal to my common sense, for instance. She would say things like, 'Honestly, Wilful, with your level head, how can you fall for such nonsense? Assurance of salvation, indeed. Spiritual experience, my foot. Next, you'll be seeing lights and hearing bells. Where is your head?' And And another time she would say, all right, if you must believe something, then believe he was a great moralist. All right, so he really lived. Does that mean you have to go overboard? Do you have to become positively orgiastic about it? Believe what you want to, but stop demonstrating. Stop attending these miserable churches and stop milling about with those schizophrenies. Moral teacher? Interrupted Alexis. Did she not realize that anyone claiming to be what he claimed to be would be the very opposite of moral if the claims were untrue? Of all the rationalizations, this concept of him is by far the most irrational. But then, I did not mean to break in. Please go on. Well, sometimes she got off in the direction of doing good and of occupying excess energy in constructive ways. She would say, join some boys' club, Wilful. Do your bit for humanity in that way. Become a leader for some underprivileged group. This will be more helpful to you than silly emotions, and to the boys too. And on occasion, she would be quite upset about it, especially if someone like Mrs. Savage took it upon herself to call and set Della right. She would say, this is nothing more than borderline insanity, religious fairy tales. The bad are punished and the good are rewarded, but somehow it happens in quite the opposite way. Much more of this paradoxical idiocy, and you will go quite mad and drive all the rest of us along with you. Another time she would say, for goodness sake, Wilful, get up on your hind legs and act like a male human being, will you? Look at the time you waste with these creatures. The world is passing by, and all you are doing is indulging in juvenile fantasy while you sup with babes on milk toast. Then again, she would take the opposite point of view and say shyly, who do you think you're fooling? Do you suppose I, the legal mother of your illegitimate child, can be bluffed into thinking you have shut off all the valves of your manhood? One of these days, another folly transient will come along, and you will revert to being human again. Why try to pretend in the meantime that you are any different? Why not admit what you are and live with it? Dear, dear, said Alexis. She seems to have thought of everything. Oh, she's a clever girl, all right. She still had a few others up her sleeve. One of the others was, after all, Wilfred, what has this really got to do with what you set out to find? You know perfectly well you are surrounded by hateful, hypocritical creatures, so why pretend that the few who are decent sufficiently dilute the others? You know you are miserable. What has all this business of artificial rules and chains and spite to do with what you thought he was? Admit that you made a mistake and let's be done with it. That argument came the closest to any of dissuading me, except for one other, because you see, it wasn't all I had hoped, and I was only trying to be obedient as best I knew how, hoping inside that it would get better, that I would progress as a Christian to the point of, well, actually to the point of becoming blind. That's what it would have taken. If I had been blind and senseless and dumb, if I had become tough-shelled enough to overlook cruelty and stubborn ignorance, well, in other words, if I were dead. But you said this came to the closest, except for one other. I should like to hear the other. But first, I should like you to answer, quite honestly now, whether you do not really feel that, if you had joined some other church, you would have been given coexistence a more thorough try. Honestly now, Hellbent. Alexis, I said sincerely, despite my promise to Della, I would have joined any one of these churches if just once I had ever felt really welcome or really closer to him through their fellowship. Truthfully, after a session with someone like Bully Rude, I came away feeling like a demon. I did attempt to be active in the churches I attended and discovered I was not sturdy enough to withstand their tactics. On one occasion, I was months doctoring an ulcer. And if you are about to point out that I never learned to lean on him, then I will have to counter with the fact that the schools I attended taught me little more than self-preservation. And in the end, even that proved meaningless. I have been totally disillusioned, Alexis. Besides, I do not really believe the individual believer is the solution to the present coldness and distance from his teachings. What is needed more than individuals straggling in together is a totally cleansed and rejuvenated comradeship, witnessing lovingly to each other and the whole world. This is, as far as I can see, can only come about when believers see him as he really is, and not as they like to think he is, or as they have been erroneously trained to think he is. They can perceive and receive this sight only from him, and only by permitting him to give it to them. They will know when they have received it, because the reality of him will cause them to rise above and beyond self. Alexis watched me silently for a moment, while the birds went twittering about on his person, and the cats continued to sleep unselfconsciously. "I am amazed," he said finally, "that knowing this, you committed suicide." Why amazed? What could I do about it except to have myself considered a crank and a meddler? It would have taken a miracle, Alexis. I was too barraged from all sides to await any miracles. But suicide, Hellbent? Such a drastic step? Surely others on this earth are disillusioned too. Surely then they are made of sturdier stuff than I, or they want material existence more than I. And I would not call 40 years drastic, Alexis. It took me that long, that much of life to decide death, or I hope peace was better. Remember that for the last 10 of those 40 years, I had believers displaying their personalities on one side and Della on the other. Ah, yes, Hellbent. What was her winning argument? I sighed heavily now. The sun is high now. Why don't the cats climb down and prowl? Why don't the birds go looking for food? I remember they used to wake me at 4 in the morning in such weather as this, chattering and trilling and flying back and forth, and the cat across the hall. They are not hungry, Alexis said quietly, lifting a sparrow on his forefinger to permit it to rub its bill against his cheek. They are full, but you are hedging again, Hellbent. What was the final argument? There is still time. That was the final argument. When all else failed, when I had refuted every other argument, then she would weep and plead, "There is still time, Wilfred. You can denounce this madness and it will melt away like a bad dream. Otherwise we will be apart forever. Think of it, Non and Vicey and I away from you. I know you are angry with me right now. I know you have used underhanded means of appealing to you, but wipe all that away and only think of the one fact neither of us has ever been able to bear. Out of all beings on all the earth, Wilfred, only you are truly a part of me. Only I am truly a part of you, conceived and nurtured in the same womb, inseparable since that very instant, soulfully affixed one to another. Wilfred, I can't bear it. I can't bear it. Please, while there is still time, break away from this nightmare and come back to me." I broke off, my voice ragged. Alexis started to speak, but I said quickly, "Oh, I know that we are not supposed to love relatives more than him, but loving him more than her meant dwelling with them." And I didn't give in all in a minute. In fact, I never even told her that I had given in at all. I refuted even that argument. I wept too, and I said, "Then you will come my way. You believe and accept, Della. Between the two of us, we can convince Non and little Vicey. Do you think I can bear the thought of you in hell? Come my way." Yes, Hellbent." She became very angry, I'm afraid. She drew away from me and crossed the room and said very coldly, "Don't you start that hellfire nonsense with me. I've heard evangelists by the score use fear to convict people of sin, but I know a little bit about him too, and I have yet to read a passage in the guidebook wherein he employed those tactics. He had more to say about the self-righteous bigots you invite me to amalgamate with than he did about sins those hucksters alternate cry and croon over. I'm not afraid of what lies below, but I tremble when I think of what faces us above. our parents and all their relatives and all those who have driven you to anguish since you made this foolish decision. I simply could not bear it. Nothing of the guidebook shows in any of them. Indeed, the very opposites prevail. He never attempted to frighten people. Even Paul, who had committed infamous sins against him, was simply made to see him as he was. No, Wilful, I will never come your way, never inoculate such infantile gabble into another conversation with me. As long as you live, I will never change, never. And so, Alexis nodded solemnly. You can tell me the mechanics of it along the way, he said. Right now, we had better get started. He shifted his position, but the birds only fluttered and maintained their various footholds. Now, he said softly, it's time for me to be off. One by one, he picked up the birds and sent them out through the window. A few darted away, glittering in the sun for several yards. Some settled on twigs and branches like colored bulbs, slowly going out. Finally, he picked up the reluctant cats and set them in the two opposite corners, one on either side of me. Now we are ready to go, he said, and instantly we were on the sidewalk below. We had walked only a few paces when the gray angora came down the tree, yowling and streaking of faint light. Directly behind it came the tiger, snarling and hissing. Across the street, behind a hedge and around a house, they went. Alexis paused for a moment to watch. Finally, he wagged his head lamentably and went on. It does not take long, he observed, to lose touch. That's the end of chapter 23.